Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And, I've had some people saying to me lately that title is not actually, that seems to be of an earlier era than what I do now. And I'm not sure if that's true. Maybe it is. I don't know. Am I being less of a shitlord than I used to be? It's possible. Some people have suggested I change it, but I'm reluctant to change it because, of course, that was a title given to me. There's nothing better than having the shield of an enemy, right? To taking that, And that was something that was given to me by somebody who hated me, by one of these SJWs. They thought it was going to be an insult, and I turned it into my trademark, right? I don't know. If someone can think of it's pointless if I made up a motto for myself, right? So if someone can think of a better motto, or even better yet, if we figure out what SJWs today, or what the woke grifter crowd would call me today, then use that against them, that would be great. But I'll think about it some more. Tell me what you think in the comments. Does my title still make sense or not, and do you like it? Am I still the final boss? Anyway, today I was going to talk to you because it's been a kind of a slow news week for RPGs. There hasn't been a lot of crazy new stuff going on. I'm pretty glad that there wasn't an episode of Inappropriate Characters this weekend. Otherwise, we would have been kind of screwed. So I'm going to talk to you today about a non-controversial topic. Actually, I'm going to talk to you about the subject of how to introduce, when you're creating a game world, how to introduce a mythology that makes sense. Like, I've already done videos about the gods, right? You go back to my, through my channel, and somewhere early on there, I was talking about how doing religion. And I did a video about how to do, a proper pagan religion and how to do a proper monotheistic religion in your setting that actually seems realistic, because it's hard for people to do that, especially the pagan ones. The pagan ones tend to be pretty tough. I'm moving this strategically because I see a meatball. What are you doing, meatball? You gonna jump over here? Jump this way. Come on. Come on, you can do it. There you go, meatball. There's the meatball. And now she's going up to investigate a bag that's on the refrigerator. Okay, she's up there. She's taking a good look at it right now. On her little hind legs, you can just barely see. There we go. Look at that. Oh, there she goes. Okay. So this is not about creating religion. This is about myths. And the thing is, I've seen a lot of fantasy myths done very poorly, largely for the same reason, the same way. Well, there's actually two problems. But the first is the same as why they get pagan pantheons wrong, right? Like, I've mentioned that every pagan religion in any D&D world I've seen has been crap. And it's been crap largely because it's way too consistent. Because someone decided, okay, let's pick, 16 gods. Each of them are going to have a name. And they're each going to have a specific set of portfolios of things that are interconnected, right? And that's just not how it went, right? Like, that's not how pagan gods work. And it's the same thing with myths, right? Myths and legends of ancient times and that sort of thing. Part of the problem is, let's say you create a really coherent pantheon that makes complete, consistent sense. And then you also assume that this pantheon are real and are actors in the fantasy world, right? They're doing things in the fantasy world. So when that's happening, it's going to create a bunch of consistent myths, isn't it? And that's a bit of a problem, because that's not how myth ends up feeling like in the real world. Because in the real world, the creation of myth is something that happens over the course of thousands of years, or hundreds of years at least, and it involves a conflict of like a survival of the fittest sort of situation, as far as what stories become legends, what legends become myths, and how those myths change over time and how they develop, right? So a myth ends up usually being a product of a combination of several influences and several stories over many long periods of times, tied to a place or to an event or to a person. but that are going to have some inconsistencies, so to say. And so you've got to kind of be careful that your myths don't sound like a modern story. And that, I guess that's the very core of it. The thing at the most fundamental part of it is, you know why they call it a novel? You know, in literature we have novels because they're new. Novel means new, right? That's a new way of storytelling. It is opposite to the idea of chronicles or of myths or of legends, which are the old way of telling stories. The novel tries to be super consistent because it's trying to tell a story at the beginning, a middle, and end. It has a whole formula. You know, the formula you learned in English class, you know, with the beginning, the rising, the climax, the denouement, all of that sort of stuff, right? It's a formulaic way, a cheap way, and it's really a mass production way to do literature, which makes sense. And I think it came up in the beginning of the industrial era, right? That's where the novel dates back. The novel's only a couple hundred years old, right? And it's the same thing they did with the cotton ginny. I don't know how a cotton ginny works, don't ask me, right? But apparently that's something that helped make cotton work a lot faster, right? And other stuff like that, right? The mills that allowed weaving to happen much faster. Well, the novel took something that used to be ancient and homemade and figured out a way to mass produce it, which was literature, right? So suddenly any idiot could tell a story. And there are good novels and there are bad novels, right? But they're not mythology and they're not myths. And something got lost in that process that we have become increasingly divorced of, as in the run of time, we become further and further. We move every day we move farther away from God. Let's put it that way, right? Every moment we are distancing ourselves from the essence of ourselves, right? And because of that, we're having a harder and harder time relating to myth. And that has been accelerated in the postmodern era because now we're told that those things are meaningless. And now, in fact, in the woke grifter era, we're told those things are evil, right? So we're distancing ourselves from them, and therefore we don't understand them. It's why there seems to be a generation of deficient children that understand nothing of myth. They know nothing of myth. They were taught nothing of myth because that was all taken away from them in the schools. Their parents already didn't know it enough to pass it on. They have no religion. They have no common culture that we used to have. And so the only things that they have as like myth that you see that they cling to with this passion are these crap novels like Harry Potter or what's the one about the chick with the bow? I forget the name there. I had it a second ago. Anyways, you know which one I mean, right? Those young adult novels, those become a substitute. They're such a pathetic substitute, right? It's like a cargo cult of what was once actual myth. Anyhow, enough of the ranting. What you want to do is have mythic context that happen in the world of your characters. Like, let's say in terms of practical purposes in the game, you're presenting myth as something, first of all, that is part of the common story of everybody. Then there's also local myths that characters might only find when they go to certain places, because there are tiers of, like, the myths. There's the big myths, right? How, the sky god created the world or something like that, right? And then there's like the myths that are very localized to a specific area, right? Like, this island hero that was actually the son of such and such god, and how he slew this monster serpent thing in the volcano. that could end up being a local myth, right? And that myth might be one that nobody outside of that place is likely to have heard of, except maybe some scholars, right? And then there's also like competing accounts of myths, because obviously all of these things, even if you're supposing these are all events that really happened, right? Because you're in a fantasy setting, so let's say the gods are real, the heroes are real, all of it really happened, right? It happened a long, long time ago. So there's still no reason why you can't have competing accounts of myth, right? Where, the god of booze created his sacred spring of water that would, heal you and make you drunk forever or something like that. Let's say that he did that on this mountain, and then some other people say, no, he did it on that mountain over there, right? And it's possible that they could have forgotten which mountain it was, right? So all of those are things that you should include in the framework of your myth. Now, how do myths survive? Because it's no good if you're just making any old myth. Myths aren't things that talk about topical subjects. They talk about eternal subjects. They're important because they either explain why something is the way it is, and those are the dumber myths. Let's put it that way, right? Like, why does it snow in the winter? Well, because such and such God did this, right? Like, that's a simplistic and kind of a dumb myth. Or they teach us valuable moral or mystical lessons. That's why they survive. They're meant to be real events, but other accounts of other things that happen, if you had like the story of some guy who claimed he was the son of a war god, and then he was basically an asshole to everyone, but accomplished nothing in his life and died at the end, that's not going to end up being an epic story, right? Like, the guy that was the son of a war god, he was kind of an asshole, but he actually turned out to be indestructible and killed everyone in his path until this one guy found out his true weakness and then slew him because of the guy's arrogance. There you go. That's a myth that might persist, especially if it was part of a major event like a big war, right? So this is part of the thing you have to figure out when you're making a myth for your game world is, what do you want it to have within itself, right? Like, is it a moral story? Is it like, why is the sky blue type story? Or is it a story that has deep-rooted spiritual and esoteric symbolism, right? So there are kind of these MegaMyths. Like, there's these places where myth happens, and in those places there's like myths that are just about explaining the place, and the place ends up being a kind of model of something we're supposed to learn. And it usually works on several different levels. So I'm going to give you an example, right? Mount Parnassus. Mount Parnassus in Greek mythology is the mountain where you have the Oracle of Delphos, right? The Delphic Oracle was a real place. It was the most famous oracle in the world. It ran from about like 1400 BC, possibly as early as 1400 BC, definitely at least 900 BC, all the way until 380 BC when Theodosius ordered it shut down because it was, he outlawed all the pagan cults. It was considered the great fortune teller of that entire age in the Greco-Roman world, and certainly at the peak period, which was around, a little bit before the time of Socrates and company. So it was a very important place, but that's not a myth. That's just history. That really happened, right? There was really an Oracle of Delphi, right? So now there is a myth of, why is the Oracle of Delphi there, right? And the story of the Oracle of Delphi, the history of the Oracle of Delphi, the real thing that we know for sure, is that the Oracle of Delphi on Mount Parnassus was this place of pilgrimage. People would go, they would ask question of the Oracle, who was sometimes called the Pythia. And the question, they would then be sent down to the cave where the Pythia was. And in this cave, the Pythia was breathing in these fumes that are almost certainly some kind of, gases that came out of the earth, at a point where it was said to be where a sacred spring had come down into the earth and in the mountain. She would speak out an oracle in a poetic verse that would usually, it was very rarely just direct, straightforward in what it said. Sometimes, if you were lucky, it made the message pretty clear, hit the road, Jack, or something like that. Or, you can't always get what you want, or something like that. Or sometimes it also said stuff that was really obscure, right? And sometimes it kind of hedged its bet, right? When there's a famous story of one king that went there and said, "What will happen in my invasion?" And the Pythia, she said, "As a result of your invasion, a kingdom will be destroyed." And he said, "Yes, I'm going to win." And it turned out he was the one who's going to lose. So that was the oracular system of Delphi. And the question of, well, why is it Delphi, right? It goes to the fact that there's a temple of Apollo there. And so there's a story about Apollo. When he was quite young, he went to Mount Parnassus, and he was looking for a place to establish himself. And he found this creature called the Delphine, which was a she serpent. First of all, the rationale for the place being Mount Parnassus is first that Mount Parnassus is supposedly in the center of the entire world. It's the middle of the world, right? It's the mountain in the center of the world. That's a very important idea, right? The idea of being in the middle of all things. The world, remember, is a chthonic deity. It's a goddess. It's Gaia. And so there was a shrine in Parnassus called the Omphalos. Omphalos is Greek for belly button. It was the belly button of the world. It was the life connector between the mother goddess of the earth, who was, by the way, a complete bitch. This is very important for the near future. And man, right? And creation. So Apollo going there was him saying, this is where I am. This is where I must be, is in the center of all things, right? And he goes there and he finds that it's guarded by this serpent thing called the Delphine, which is a she snake that was a daughter of Gaia, because Gaia is this primordial natural force. She's uncontrollable, and she creates great things and she creates terrible things. She creates monsters, right? And Apollo, who's the god of the sun, he's not just the god of the sun, he's also the god of civilization. He's the god of music, of poetry. He's the god of order. And so what is he doing? He slays the Delphine, bringing order out of chaos, right? He takes down this monstrosity, and he places there the temple of the sun, the union of the sun and the earth coming together in the center of the world. There's some very powerful magical symbolism to all that, right? And there, in the cave of the oracle, he puts his priesthood of these women that were going to do these divinations that came out of the waters of the earth and then were done to the glory of the sun. But that's not all. There's more details to all this, right? But anyways, the explanation was this story, so at the very basic, like child level, it's, well, the Apollo was this great guy. He had a magic bow and arrow. He killed this evil serpent. And then there was this, even in some versions of the story, when Delphine is killed, it's her corpse that falls into a crevice in the earth. And it's actually the gases from her corpse that are what the Pythia is inhaling to do her prophecies. Okay. So you can't really get more wild and wacky with the myth than that, right? So there's that kiddie version of it, right? But then there's also like this explanation of, well, hang on, but this is because this is the middle of all things. This is the center place. This is where we first came out of the mother. What linked us to her. And there's all of these Jungian images and all that, right? But it goes on to have other details to it too, right? Because Parnassus has two sides. Apollo, the side that he conquered by slaying the she-snake and establishing his temple, that side is the civilized side. On the other side of Parnassus is the barbaric side, where you find the cave where the great god Pan lives. The great god Pan is the goat-footed, half-animal, half-man god, representing the savage, barbaric nature of man in his animal-like state, right? And he's this thing that it's this wild place where you are told, you can't dare go there unless you're one of the true initiates and one of the initiates of the Dionysic mysteries, right? Why? Because the great god Pan, he brought up Dionysus, who is the god of, you probably think of him as the god of wine, right? But he's also the god of of lust. He's the god of abandon. He's kind of the patron god of stupor and ecstasy, right? So in both cases, on the light side and the dark side, there's this gas that makes you do funny things, right? There's in the case of, well, there's this water that makes you do funny things. In one case, it's water that has this gas, and the other one, it's alcohol, right? And in one side, it leads you to be able to see with clarity. And the other one, it leads you to abandon, but an abandon that is liberating. Because fundamentally, Dionysus is the god of two things: of freedom and of the future. He's the god who comes. He's the god that is to one day replace Zeus, right? But more than that, right? Apollo and Dionysus represent the two forms of mystery school that exist in the ancient world, right? The solar mysteries and what you could call the Dionysian mysteries, or the Orphic mysteries, or the phallic mysteries. What later on in alchemy becomes the dry path and the wet path of alchemy, right? So there are these two ways of connecting to the divine, right? Connecting to the divine through discipline and careful cultivation, connecting to the divine through ecstasy and abandon and fervor and being willing to risk one's entire being, right? In India, there are these two divisions. That's yoga on the one side and tantra on the other, right? So it's something that you see everywhere. And so it's talking about, because this is the holy mountain, Parnassus, right? So one side of the mountain is savage, the other side is civilized. One side of the mountain is where you have the way of the civilized cultivation, and the other one, the side of ecstatic, zealot abandon, right? And what's more, Apollo in the winter months, he does not reign there, right? And the Delphic oracle is closed, and Dionysus takes charge. So, in fact, if you look at a deep moral interpretation of that part of the myth, it's actually saying, or deep esoteric interpretation, it's actually suggesting that the initiate has to be able to combine both sides in certain proportions, that there is a time where you should be doing the disciplined path and a time when you should be doing the path of abandon. Too much excess in either way is going to cause you a problem. But an approach where you can do both is going to lead you to a higher state, right? So these are things that were probably not all in the myth right from the beginning, but you can see how this myth evolved and tacked on more useful things to it, right? There's even one more detail, which is that Hestia has a temple on Parnassus too, the goddess of the hearth, the eternal flame, right? And Hestia, her temple is open all year round. And so you have Gaia, the savage mother, right? The dark mother, the force of the feminine as uncontrolled nature, danger, and chaos, who has to be repressed and controlled by the power of Apollo, the solar deity, the masculine deity, right? But then you have the temple of Hestia, right? And Hestia is the mother goddess, the civilized mother goddess. And in fact, she's the civilizing mother goddess. She's the goddess of the hearth, the home, of being, brought into the institutions of the most, fundamental unit. It's part of the home and the family, right? So Hestia is the goddess that represents the feminine used as a civilized and civilizing influence on the world. And it's this path that is ever present, because even as the masculine must alternate between its extremes, right? The feminine's benefit is consistency. So anyways, that's just one bit of the explanation of all the stuff that you could associate with one place in a fantasy setting, right? Like, that's all happening on the same mountain, right? And it ties into these ancient stories. And there's a lot that I left out, but I don't want this video to get too long or to start sounding too much like a Jordan Peterson lecture. So there we go. But this is kind of the idea of what I'm getting at, right? So put some thought into what you make out of your myth in your settings. Your stories need to have a feeling that they're not modern novel stories, but that they're a collection of ancient stories that serve different purposes that have been tacked on together with each other over the years, some of which are going to be universal, some of which are going to be regional, and that have some kind of a purpose, which is why they survived. If they didn't have a purpose, they wouldn't survive. It's why most novels don't survive, right? Very, very few novels are sufficiently spiritually significant, so to say, for them to survive as a human artifact, right? Shakespeare does, because he's not a novelist, he's doing something else, and it taps into something deep, right? There are probably novels that were, there are novels from the beginning of the age of novels that we still look at, and that have a purpose, like Moby Dick, right? They're ones that tap into, find a way to, even despite being novels, tap into those fundamental archetypal forces that we want to understand and we want to interpret. And you have to do the same thing in your setting. Anyways, that's it for today. If you like this video, please share it anywhere that somebody might benefit from it. I don't think there's a lot too controversial in this video that'll piss off anyone. But if you think it'll piss someone off, sure, go right ahead. Share it too. Hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. But in particular, if you want to support me, you can. There's a couple of things you could be doing. You could throw money at me through PayPal or through Patreon. I have links in the description below. But if you want to support me and get something back for yourself, you should check out my products. Stuff like Dark Albion, which has a ton of stuff that ties into the myth and legend of the Middle Ages. Lion and Dragon and the Old School Companion. All of these, if you like the cut of my jib in this video, you're going to like these products a lot, I think. Because it's all about trying to create a more authentic experience of being in the paradigm of the way people thought in the Middle Ages, right? So, yeah, you'll like those. And if you're not that much into that, well, check out Star Adventure, my space opera game, or World of the Last Sun, my gonzo post-apocalyptic fantasy game. If you don't have, if you think you don't have enough cash, a lot of these are really cheap. Like Lion and Dragon is, I think, $23. It's super cheap. But if you don't have enough cash for these sort of things, you can also check out my RPG Pundit Presents series. I have 104 issues right now. There's more still coming. We're having a bit of delays in Spectre Press at the moment, but it's there are going to be more that are going to come along. Every issue is a mini product, anywhere from maybe 5 up to 30 pages, that will give you something that you can use in your OSR game, in your D&D game, in your fantasy RPG game. Most of them are set up to be very compatible. Definitely OSR compatible, 100%, but compatible with just about usable in just about anything. Easy to transplant into whatever you're doing. And it has every range of things from, all the way from gritty, medieval authentic up to crazy ass gonzo. You're bound to find something that you like. You're probably going to find a few somethings that you like. And they're cheap. Like they're between 99 cents and $4.99 a piece. Somewhere in between that range. So it's like you're buying me maybe a coffee at most, right? But you're also getting something back for yourself. And I love to, that's what I like a lot is that whatever you're doing, if you're supporting me, I want you to get something back that you're going to use in actual gaming, and I hope that you will. So that's everything for today. Currently smoking Lorenzetti egg plus Argento Natural.